The scorching sun hung like a copper penny in the vast Arizona sky when Preston Aldridge first spotted her a lone figure huddled against the trunk of a cottonwood tree, her shoulders trembling despite the sweltering heat of the summer of 1875. Her dress, once a fine calico, was streaked with dust and desert grime, and she clutched a small bundle to her chest as if it were the last precious thing in her possession. Preston reined in his Palomino stallion, Eclipse, who nickered softly as if sensing the woman's distress from 20 yards away. "Madam," Preston called out, his voice gentle despite years of shouting over stampeding cattle. "You all right there?" When she raised her head, he saw a face that struck him like a physical blow, not because of its beauty, though she possessed that in abundance despite the exhaustion etched across her features, but because of the raw shame that clouded her deep blue eyes. Those eyes, Preston thought, held the look of someone who'd been running for a very long time. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible over the whisper of wind through the dry grass. "Please just ride on, sir. I'm not fit company for a decent man." Preston dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent more time in the saddle than out of it. His spurs jingled softly as his boots hit the packed earth. He approached slowly, the way he might a spooked horse, keeping his hands visible and his movements deliberate. "Name's Preston Aldridge," he said, tipping his well-worn Stetson. "And I reckon I'll be the judge of what company suits me." He paused, studying her from beneath the brim of his hat. "You look like you could use some water and maybe a hot meal. My ranch is just over that ridge yonder." The woman clutched her bundle tighter and shook her head. "You don't understand, I can't." Her voice broke, and tears traced clean lines down her dirt-smudged cheeks. "What's your name?" Preston asked, crouching down to her level, keeping a respectful distance. After a long moment, she whispered, Katherine Keller." "Well, Miss Keller," Preston said, noting how she winced at the miss, "I don't claim to understand whatever burden you're carrying, but I can see plain as day that you've been carrying it far too long." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen, offering it to her. As she hesitantly accepted it, her fingers brushing against his, he noticed the absence of a wedding ring, though there was a pale band of skin where one might have been. "Whatever shame you're bearing," Preston said softly as she drank, "you've carried enough of it." The bundle in Catherine's arms shifted then, and a tiny mewling sound emerged. Preston's eyes widened slightly as a small fist waved from within the swaddling cloth. Catherine's eyes immediately filled with a fierce protectiveness mixed with her earlier shame. "This is why I can't accept your help," she said, her voice stronger now. "My daughter is. I'm not married, Mr. Aldridge. There's no room in decent society for women like me." Preston's weathered face remained impassive, though his gray eyes softened as he looked at the infant. "Miss Keller," he said evenly, "out here in the West, we judge folks by how they face the trail ahead, not the one they've left behind." He stood, dusting off his chaps. "Now, my housekeeper, Mrs. Caraway is the soul of discretion and makes a stew that would make the angels weep. Your little one there looks like she could use some proper shelter." He extended his hand. No strings attached, just neighborly kindness. Katherine stared at his outstretched hand for what seemed an eternity before slowly reaching out her own. "Just for tonight," she whispered, "and then we'll be moving on." Preston helped her to her feet, noting how she swayed slightly with exhaustion. "Eclipse here is a gentleman who won't mind carrying a lady and her child," he said, leading his horse closer. "Though I should warn you, he's vain as a peacock and expects compliments." For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched Catherine's lips. "Is that so, indeed? Cost me an extra apple every time a pretty lady ignores him." As Preston helped Katherine mount, keeping his touch respectful and brief, he couldn't help but notice the way she cradled her infant with practiced care despite her obvious fatigue. Whatever her story was, and he suspected it was filled with more pain than a woman her age should know, she was clearly devoted to her child. He swung up behind her, careful to maintain a proper distance, and clicked his tongue to set Eclipse in motion. "About 2 miles to home," he said, keeping his voice casual. "Mrs. Caraway usually has supper ready by sundown. Hope you don't mind beef. Running cattle is what keeps the rocking afloat." Katherine sat rigid at first, then gradually relaxed as Eclipse's steady gait rocked them along. "I haven't had a proper meal in 3 days," she admitted quietly. "Anything will be a feast." Preston felt a surge of anger at whoever had abandoned this woman and her child, but he kept his voice level. "Well, Mrs. Carroway believes feeding people is her sacred duty. You'll be eating well tonight." They rode in silence for a while, the vast landscape of mesas and scrubland stretching around them. The baby had fallen asleep, lulled by the horse's rhythmic movement. "She's beautiful," Preston said softly, nodding toward the infant. Katherine tensed slightly. "Her name is Emma," she said after a moment. "She's 3 months old." "Emma," Preston repeated. "Fine name for a strong girl." The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon as they crested a small rise and the rocking spread out before them. It wasn't the biggest ranch in the territory, but it was substantial, a main house built of sturdy pine logs, a large barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. A corral held several horses, and in the distance, cattle grazed on what sparse vegetation the Arizona land provided. "It's not much," Preston said with the modesty of a man who had built something from nothing, "but it's home." "It's beautiful," Katherine whispered, and he could hear the longing in her voice, not for the ranch itself, but for what it represented: stability, safety, belonging. As they approached, a gray-haired woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. Mrs. Carroway had been with Preston since he'd staked his claim 10 years ago, following the war that had left him with both physical and invisible scars. "Preston Aldridge," she called out, her voice carrying the hint of her Irish ancestry. "I was beginning to think you'd gotten yourself lost between here and town again." "Not lost, Mrs. Carroway," he replied as he dismounted and reached up to help Katherine down. "Just found someone who needed a bit of help." Mrs. Carroway's eyes widened momentarily at the sight of Katherine and the baby, but to her credit, her expression quickly shifted to one of practical concern. "Well, bring them in then. Poor thing looks about ready to drop, and that wee babe could use a proper washing." Katherine clutched Emma closer, her expression wary. "It's all right," Preston assured her. "Mrs. Carroway raised 5 children of her own. Emma couldn't be in better hands while you rest." Katherine began, then faltered. Mrs. Carroway stepped forward, her face softening. "Come now, dear. A hot bath for you, clean clothes, and a proper meal. The little one will be right nearby, I promise. No woman should have to face the world alone with a babe in arms." Something in the older woman's kind but no-nonsense tone seemed to reach Katherine in a way Preston's words hadn't. She nodded, allowing Mrs. Carroway to usher her toward the house. "I'll see to Eclipse," Preston called after them. As he led his horse toward the barn, he couldn't help but glance back at the doorway where Katherine had disappeared. There was a story there, a painful one, he suspected, but whatever it was, he meant what he'd said by that cottonwood tree. Whatever shame she'd carried it long enough. Inside the barn, as he removed Eclipse's saddle and began to brush him down, the ranch foreman, Hank Taylor, sauntered in. A grizzled veteran of the frontier at 55, Hank had been with Preston since the beginning. "Saw you bringing in company," Hank said, leaning against a post. "Pretty company at that," Preston continued, brushing Eclipse's golden coat. "She was stranded out by Cottonwood Creek, her and her baby." Hank's bushy eyebrows shot up. "Baby, little girl named Emma." Preston paused. "They needed help, Hank, that's all you need to know." The older man studied Preston for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Reckon that's right." He pushed himself off the post. "Supper's almost ready. Mrs. Carroway sent me to tell you to wash up." "I'll be there shortly," Preston replied, giving Eclipse a final pat before closing the stall door. When Preston entered the house 20 minutes later, freshly washed and in a clean shirt, he found Katherine seated at the kitchen table. She'd clearly bathed and changed into what must be one of Mrs. Carroway's spare dresses, the sleeves rolled up to accommodate her smaller frame. Her dark blonde hair, damp from washing, hung in waves down her back. Emma, swaddled in a fresh blanket, slept peacefully in a wooden cradle that Preston recognized as one Mrs. Carroway kept for when her grandchildren visited. "There you are, Mrs. Carroway said, setting a steaming bowl of stew before him. Now eat before it gets cold. Katherine had already started on her own bowl, though she ate slowly, as if savoring each bite or perhaps afraid it would be taken away. When she noticed Preston watching her, she blushed faintly. "It's delicious," she said quietly. "Thank you both for your kindness." "Nonsense," Mrs. Carraway replied, taking a seat with her own bowl. "Basic Christian charity is all." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Preston spoke. "Miss Keller, I hope you'll reconsider your plan to leave tomorrow, at least until you've had a chance to regain your strength." Katherine lowered her spoon. "I couldn't impose, it's no imposition," Preston assured her. "We've plenty of room, and to be frank, having a little one around would brighten the place up." He smiled slightly. "Besides, Mrs. Carraway has been threatening to quit and move in with her daughter if I don't provide her with more company than just myself and a bunch of ranch hands." "He's not wrong," Mrs. Carraway confirmed with a sniff. "Talking to these men is like talking to fence posts, only the fence posts have better manners." A small smile played at the corners of Katherine's mouth. "Still, we can't stay long. I need to find work, somewhere I can support Emma." Preston leaned back in his chair. "As it happens, I could use someone to help with the accounts and correspondence. Ranch is doing well enough, but the paperwork's piling up and neither Mrs. Carraway nor I have the patience for it." Katherine's eyes widened. "You're offering me a job." "If you've the skills for it," Preston said with a shrug. "Can you read and cipher?" "I was a schoolteacher," Katherine replied, a note of pride creeping into her voice for the first time. Before Emma." "Well then," Preston said, as if that settled everything. "You'd be doing me a favor, honestly. There's a small cabin about 50 yards from the main house that my former foreman used. It's been empty since he moved on last year, but it's sound and would give you and Emma your own space." Katherine looked from Preston to Mrs. Carraway, who was nodding approvingly. "I don't understand," she said finally. "Why would you do this for me, for us? You don't even know me." Preston met her gaze steadily. "Miss Keller, I've learned in my 42 years that life's hard enough without folks making it harder on each other. Whatever brought you to that cottonwood tree today is your business. All I care about is whether you can help with the books, and whether having a roof over your head and food in your belly would make life a bit easier for you and that little girl." Katherine's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "It would," she whispered. "It would make all the difference." "Then it's settled," Mrs. Carraway declared, standing to clear the bowls. "You'll stay at least until you've got your strength back, and we'll see about the rest." As if on cue, Emma began to fuss in her cradle. Katherine immediately rose to tend to her, lifting the infant with practiced gentleness. "She'll be hungry," she said, a flush rising to her cheeks. "If you'll excuse me." "Of course," Preston said, standing as Katherine left the room with Emma. Once she was gone, he turned to Mrs. Carraway with a raised eyebrow. The housekeeper crossed her arms. "Don't you look at me like that, Preston Aldridge. I know what you're thinking." "And what am I thinking, Mrs. Carraway?" "That I'm getting old and soft, taking in strays," she huffed. "Well, maybe I am. But that girl has the look of someone who's been wronged badly, and that baby deserves a chance, same as anyone." Preston nodded slowly. "On that, we're agreed. Just mind yourself," Mrs. Carraway warned. "She's vulnerable, and you're the first man who's shown her kindness in a while, I'd wager." "I offered her a job and a place to stay, nothing more," Preston replied, slightly offended. Mrs. Carraway hummed skeptically. "And I'm Queen Victoria." Preston chose to ignore this, instead helping to clear the rest of the table. "I'll show her the cabin tomorrow," he said. "It'll need a good airing out, but it should do nicely for her and Emma." "Already got Hank and the boys cleaning it up," Mrs. Carraway informed him with a smug smile. "Should be ready by noon tomorrow." Preston chuckled. "Always 2 steps ahead of me, aren't you?" "Someone has to be," she replied primly. "Now, I've made up the guest room for her tonight. You make sure those ranch hands know to mind their manners and their tongues when they see her tomorrow. I won't have gossip making life harder for that girl." "I'll speak to them," Preston promised, knowing his men would follow his lead. Most of them were good sorts who'd faced their own hardships. They weren't likely to judge a woman for whatever circumstances had brought her to the rocking A. Later that evening, as Preston sat on the porch smoking his pipe and watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky, he heard the door open behind him. Katherine stepped out, wrapping a borrowed shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. "Emma's asleep," she said softly. "Mrs. Caraway is watching over her." Preston stood, offering her his chair, but she shook her head and leaned against the porch railing instead. "It's beautiful here," she said, gazing out at the land that stretched to the distant mountains, now shadowy silhouettes against the darkening sky. "So open. Free. That's why I came here," Preston admitted. "After the war, couldn't stand being hemmed in by too many buildings, too many people." Katherine glanced at him. "You fought in the war," Preston nodded, touching his left thigh unconsciously. "Union cavalry. Got this leg shot up at Gettysburg. Healed well enough, but it tells me when rain's coming better than any weather vane." "I lost my brother at Antietam," Katherine said quietly. "He was just 19. "I'm sorry," Preston replied, and he meant it. The war had left scars on everyone, one way or another. Too many good men lost. They stood in silence for a while, each lost in their own memories. Finally, Katherine spoke again. "Mr. Aldridge, Preston, please." She hesitated, then continued. "Preston, I want to be honest with you since you've been so kind about Emma." She took a deep breath. "I was engaged to a man in my hometown in Missouri. Thomas. He was the banker's son, and my parents were thrilled with the match, but when I told him I was expecting, her voice faltered. He denied the child was his, called me terrible things, broke our engagement very publicly." Preston's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. "My family, they couldn't bear the scandal. They gave me money to go away to have the baby somewhere else. Said I could come back without her, say I'd been visiting relatives and had married but was widowed." Her voice hardened. "I couldn't give her up, she's all I have." "You made the right choice," Preston said firmly. "A mother and child belong together." Katherine looked at him in surprise. "Most people would say I should have given her to a family who could provide for her properly." "A family with a father." "Most people talk a lot of nonsense," Preston replied. "I've known men who weren't fit to raise a hound dog, let alone a child, and women who could do anything they set their minds to. You're clearly one of the latter." A small smile touched Katherine's lips. "Thank you for that and for not judging me." "Not my place to judge," Preston said simply. "Besides, seems to me the only person who did something wrong in your story is this Thomas fellow, and he's not here for me to tell him what I think of men who abandon their responsibilities." Katherine's smile widened slightly. "I suspect that would be quite a conversation." "Indeed it would," Preston agreed, returning her smile. He tapped out his pipe against the porch rail. "It's getting late and you've had a long day, best get some rest." Katherine nodded but lingered a moment longer. "I still don't understand why you're helping us, but I'm grateful, truly." Preston considered her words carefully before answering. "My pa used to say that a man is measured not by what he takes, but by what he gives freely. I haven't always lived up to that, but I try." He paused. "And sometimes, Miss Keller, helping others is how we heal ourselves." She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to read the story behind his words. "Good night, Preston," she said finally. "Good night, Katherine," he replied, watching as she slipped back inside the house, the door closing softly behind her. As he turned back to the star-filled sky, Preston knew Mrs. Caraway's warning had been well-founded. There was something about Katherine Keller that touched a place in him he'd thought long closed off a vulnerability beneath her courage that called to him. But she had Emma to think of, and her own healing to do. Whatever feelings might be stirring in him would need to be kept firmly in check. For now, it was enough that she and her daughter were safe. The rest would sort itself out in time. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of pristine Arizona day that made Preston grateful for this harsh but beautiful land he called home. He'd been up since before sunrise, as was his habit, checking on newborn calves with Hank and discussing the day's work with his ranch hands. By the time he returned to the main house for breakfast, Katherine was already at the kitchen table, Emma cradled in one arm while she awkwardly tried to eat with her free hand. Mrs. Caraway bustled around the stove, frying bacon and muttering about men who couldn't be on time for meals. "Good morning," Preston said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door and washing his hands at the basin. Katherine looked up with a smile that transformed her face, making her appear younger and reminding Preston that she couldn't be much more than 25. "Good morning." "Emma and I slept better than we have in months." "Glad to hear it," Preston replied, taking a seat as Mrs. Carroway placed a heaping plate before him. "I've checked on the cabin. The boys have it nearly ready, just needs fresh bedding and a few touches to make it homelike." "I don't need much," Katherine assured him. "Just a clean place for Emma is all that matters." "Well, you'll have that and more," Mrs. Carroway declared. "I've found a cradle that Mr. Thompson made before he moved on beautiful pine with a rocking base. And I've some curtains that would brighten the place up." "That's very generous," Katherine said, her eyes filling with unexpected tears. "I don't know how to thank you both." "You can thank me by eating more," Mrs. Carroway said firmly, adding another biscuit to Katherine's plate. "You're thin as a rail, and that baby needs a strong mama." Preston watched as Katherine dutifully began to eat again, marveling at how naturally she balanced Emma while doing so. The baby was awake now, her wide blue eyes the same shade as her mother's, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. "May I?" Preston asked, extending his hands toward Emma. Katherine hesitated only briefly before carefully transferring the infant to him. "Support her head," she instructed, though Preston was already doing so with surprising competence. "Hello there, Miss Emma," he said softly, cradling the tiny girl in his large, weathered hands. "Welcome to the rocking, eh?" Emma regarded him solemnly before her tiny face broke into a toothless smile that caught Preston completely off guard. Something warm and unexpected unfurled in his chest. "Well, would you look at that," Mrs. Carroway said, hands on her hips. "She's taken a shine to you already." Katherine watched them, her expression a mixture of wonder and something Preston couldn't quite name. She doesn't usually warm up to strangers so quickly. "Animals and babies, Mrs. Carroway said with a knowing nod. "They can sense a good heart." Preston felt his ears redden at the compliment. "Or she just likes my mustache," he joked, running a finger gently along Emma's cheek as she continued to smile up at him. After breakfast, Preston showed Katherine around the ranch, carrying Emma as they walked. He pointed out the various buildings, introduced her to some of the hands who tipped their hats respectfully, and finally brought her to the small cabin that would be their new home. It was a simple structure, but solidly built, a main room with a stone fireplace, a small bedroom, and a lean-to kitchen. The men had cleaned it thoroughly, and Mrs. Carroway had indeed added curtains to the windows and fresh linens to the bed. The cradle stood in the corner of the bedroom, polished to a warm glow. "It's perfect," Katherine breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "I never expected. This is more than we've had in so long." "It's not much," Preston said, embarrassed by her gratitude, "but it's yours for as long as you need it." Katherine reached for Emma, and Preston carefully handed the baby back to her. "I'd like to start earning my keep as soon as possible," she said firmly. "You mentioned accounts that need attention," Preston nodded. "They're in a right state, I'm afraid. I've an office in the main house where you can work. Emma can stay with you, of course, or with Mrs. Carroway if you prefer." "I'll keep her with me for now," Katherine decided. "Until we're both more settled." "Of course," Preston agreed. "Why don't you get yourselves situated here and we'll start tomorrow? I've rounds to make this afternoon, checking on the herd, but I'll be back by supper." Katherine nodded, already moving around the cabin, familiarizing herself with her new home. "Thank you, Preston," she said, turning back to him. "I don't know what would have happened to us if you hadn't found us yesterday." "No need to think on that," Preston replied. "You're here now, and that's what matters." As he left the cabin, Preston couldn't help but glance back through the window. Katherine had settled in the rocking chair by the fireplace, Emma in her arms, and was singing softly to her daughter. The sight stirred something in him that he hadn't felt in a very long time, a sense of rightness, of possibility. Shaking himself out of his reverie, Preston strode toward the barn. He had work to do, and dwelling on such feelings would only lead to complications neither he nor Katherine needed. Over the next few weeks, Katherine and Emma settled into life at the Rocking with surprising ease. Katherine proved to be not just competent with the ranch accounts, but remarkably skilled, bringing order to years of Preston's haphazard record-keeping. Her neat handwriting filled the ledgers, and she drafted clear, professional letters to Preston's suppliers and buyers that resulted in better terms almost immediately. "You're saving me money already," Preston told her one afternoon as they reviewed the books together. "I should have hired a bookkeeper years ago." "You should have," Katherine agreed with a small smile. "Some of these entries. Did you really mean to write that you purchased 50 head of cattle in June of '73? Preston peered at the ledger. "Cattle. I assume you meant cattle," she said, laughter in her voice. "Well, 50 castles would have been beyond my means," Preston admitted with a grin, though it would have made for quite a skyline. Their easy rapport had developed naturally as they worked together each day. Katherine had blossomed in the safe environment of the ranch, growing stronger and more confident. The haunted look that had shadowed her eyes on that first day hadn't disappeared entirely, but it surfaced less frequently. Emma, too, was thriving. At 4 months old, she was a cheerful, curious baby who had the entire ranch wrapped around her tiny finger. Even the most grizzled ranch hands would stop by the office with ridiculous excuses just to make faces at her and crow with delight when she smiled in response. Mrs. Caraway had appointed herself Emma's honorary grandmother, knitting tiny caps and blankets and dispensing child-rearing advice with benevolent authority. She watched Emma whenever Katherine needed time to herself or when her work required full concentration. And Preston found himself drawn to both mother and daughter in ways that both delighted and alarmed him. He looked forward to their meals together, to the evenings when Katherine would sometimes join him on the porch after Emma was asleep. They talked about books they'd read, about Preston's plans for the ranch, about Katherine's childhood in Missouri, though she rarely mentioned her family now, and never spoke of Emma's father again after that first night. Preston was careful never to press, never to step beyond the boundaries of employer and friend. But increasingly, he found himself inventing reasons to be near the office when Katherine was working, or offering to hold Emma so Katherine could eat with both hands, or suggesting rides to show Katherine the beauty of the surrounding countryside. It was during one such ride, about a month after Katherine's arrival, that something shifted between them. Preston had suggested they pack a picnic lunch and ride to a small creek where cottonwoods provided shade from the midday sun. Mrs. Caraway had happily volunteered to watch Emma, shooing them off with a knowing look that Preston studiously ignored. They rode side by side, Katherine now comfortable on Daisy, the gentle mare Preston had assigned to her. The day was perfect, not too hot, with a light breeze carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. "It's beautiful here," Katherine said as they dismounted by the creek. "So different from Missouri, but beautiful in its own way." "That's what I thought when I first saw this land," Preston replied, spreading a blanket under the largest cottonwood. "Most people just see what's lacking: the greenness, the softness of the East, but there's a stark honesty to the desert that speaks to me." Katherine nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Nothing can hide here. Everything is exposed to the sun, to the elements. It's harsh, but there's freedom in that too." "Exactly," Preston said, surprised and pleased by her perception. He unpacked the food Mrs. Caraway had prepared: cold chicken, biscuits, apple preserves, and a jug of sweet tea. "I didn't expect to stay when I first came through after the war. Was just drifting, looking for somewhere I could breathe, but this land, it claimed me, I suppose." "I can see why," Katherine said, accepting the plate he offered. "There's a peace here, despite all the hardship." They ate in companionable silence for a while, listening to the gentle gurgle of the creek and the rustle of leaves overhead. Preston found himself watching Katherine when she wasn't looking, the way the dappled sunlight played across her face, how her hair, now often worn in a simple braid, caught the light. "Tell me about your life before," Katherine said suddenly, setting aside her plate. "You know most of my story, but you've shared very little of yours." Preston leaned back against the tree trunk. Not much to tell. Grew up in Pennsylvania, son of a blacksmith. Joined the Union Army in '62, fought till Appomattox. Came west afterward like a lot of men who couldn't settle back into their old lives. And before the war, was there someone? Katherine left the question unfinished, but her meaning was clear. Preston looked down at his hands. There was a girl, Sarah. We were to be married when I returned. He paused. She didn't wait. Can't blame her, really. War changed me. I wasn't the same boy who left. I'm sorry, Katherine said softly. Preston shrugged. It was a long time ago. She's happy, has 4 children now with the man she did marry. I get a Christmas card every year. He smiled faintly. Life has its own way of sorting things out, I suppose. And you've never wanted to marry since then? Katherine asked, then immediately flushed. I'm sorry, that's too personal. It's all right, Preston assured her. I suppose I never found the right woman, or perhaps I wasn't looking properly. He met her eyes. What about you, after? What happened with Emma's father? Have you thought about what you want for your future? Katherine looked out at the creek, her expression thoughtful. For a long time, all I could think about was survival, finding food, shelter, keeping Emma safe. But lately, she hesitated. Lately, I've allowed myself to hope again, to imagine a life where Emma and I belong somewhere, where we're not just tolerated but welcomed. You belong at the Rocking A, Preston said firmly, for as long as you want to stay. Katherine turned to look at him, something vulnerable and questioning in her gaze. And if we wanted to stay, indefinitely, Preston's heart quickened. Nothing would make me happier, he said softly. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Slowly, Preston reached out and covered Katherine's hand with his own. Her fingers turned, intertwining with his, and the simple touch sent warmth coursing through him. Katherine, he began, not entirely sure what he meant to say, only knowing that something important was happening between them. But before he could continue, the distant sound of hoofbeats broke the spell. They both turned to see a rider approaching fast, kicking up dust along the trail. Preston stood quickly, recognizing Hank's bay gelding. Something's wrong, he said, moving to intercept his foreman. Hank reined in hard, his usually unflappable face creased with concern. Boss, riders coming in from the east, 6 of them looking like trouble. Mitch recognized the leader, Jake Sullivan. Preston's expression hardened. Sullivan, what the hell does he want? No good, that's for sure, Hank replied grimly. Mrs. Carraway sent me to find you right away, said to tell you they were asking about a woman and a baby. Katherine gasped, her face draining of color. No, she whispered, it can't be. Preston turned to her, alarmed by her reaction. Katherine, do you know Sullivan? She shook her head, her hands trembling. Not Sullivan, but if they're asking about me and Emma, it could be Thomas. He said he'd find me, that he wouldn't let me ruin his reputation by claiming the child was his. Tears filled her eyes. I thought we were safe here. I thought he wouldn't look for us this far west. Preston's jaw tightened. Hank, help Miss Keller back on her horse. We need to get to the ranch now. As they rode hard back to the Rocking A, Preston's mind raced. Jake Sullivan was a notorious troublemaker, a small-time outlaw who'd been pushing the boundaries of the law in the territory for years. If he was working for this Thomas now, the situation could be dangerous indeed. Stay close to me, Preston told Katherine as they approached the ranch. Whatever happens, don't let them separate you from me or the ranch hands. She nodded, her face pale but determined. Emma, Mrs. Carraway won't let anything happen to her, Preston assured her, and Sullivan would have to go through all of us to get near either of you. When they rode into the ranch yard, the scene confirmed their worst fears. 6 men on horseback faced the main house, where 3 ranch hands stood on the porch, rifles at the ready. Mrs. Carraway could be seen through the window, clearly holding Emma and keeping well back from any potential line of fire. The leader of the riders, a lean, hard-faced man with a scar running down his left cheek, turned as Preston and Katherine arrived. His cold eyes fixed on Katherine with unpleasant recognition. Well, he drawled. Here she is, boys, the little runaway mama herself. Preston dismounted and moved to help Katherine down, keeping himself between her and the riders. Jake Sullivan, he said coldly. You're trespassing on my property. Sullivan grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. No need to get unfriendly, Aldridge. We're just here on business for a gentleman back east. Seems this lady took something that doesn't belong to her. Emma is my daughter, Katherine said fiercely, stepping out from behind Preston despite his attempt to keep her shielded. She belongs with me. That's not how Mr. Reynolds sees it, Sullivan replied. He's offering a generous sum for the return of his child. Says you're unfit, that you stole the baby and ran. Reynolds. Preston looked at Katherine, who nodded grimly. Thomas Reynolds, she confirmed, and he's lying. He denied Emma was his, wanted nothing to do with us until his parents discovered what had happened. Now they want to take her to protect their precious family name. Sullivan shrugged. Not my concern who's telling the truth. I'm just here to collect the girl and bring her home to her rightful family. You can come too if you want, though Mr. Reynolds was pretty clear he's only interested in the child. Preston's hand moved to the revolver at his hip. Around the yard, he could see his men taking up positions, weapons ready but not yet drawn. The tension in the air was palpable. You're not taking either of them anywhere, Sullivan, Preston said, his voice low and dangerous. Now get off my land before this turns ugly. Sullivan's smile vanished, his eyes hardening. You're making a mistake, Aldridge. This isn't your fight. You made it my fight when you rode onto my ranch threatening people under my protection, Preston replied evenly. Last warning. Leave now. For a tense moment, Sullivan seemed to weigh his options, his eyes flicking from Preston to the armed ranch hands surrounding them. Finally, he spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. This isn't over, he said. We'll be back, and next time we won't be asking so nice. You won't be welcome then, either, Preston responded. And if you come looking for trouble, you'll find more than you bargained for. Sullivan glared at him for a long moment before jerking his chin at his men. They wheeled their horses around and rode out, but not before Sullivan called back over his shoulder. Think about it, lady. Reynolds is offering $500. That's a lot of money to turn down for a bastard child nobody wants. Katherine flinched as if struck, but held her ground until the riders had disappeared from sight. Only then did her composure crack, her shoulders beginning to shake with silent sobs. Preston put a gentle arm around her. Come on, he said softly. Let's get you inside to Emma. Once inside, Katherine flew to Mrs. Carroway, who immediately handed over a fussing Emma. Katherine clutched her daughter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "SHH, my love," she murmured. "Mama's here, you're safe." "I won't let anyone take you." Preston conferred quietly with Hank at the door. "Double the watch tonight," he instructed. "I wouldn't put it past Sullivan to try something after dark, and send Miguel to town first thing tomorrow to alert the sheriff about Sullivan's presence in the area." Hank nodded grimly. "Will do, boss. Don't worry, we'll keep them safe." After the foreman left, Preston turned back to find Katherine watching him, Emma now quieted against her shoulder. "I should leave," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I've brought danger to your home, to your people. I can't ask you to risk yourselves for us." "You're not asking, I'm offering," Preston replied firmly, "and you're not going anywhere. Sullivan and his kind prey on people they think are alone and unprotected. That's not you, not anymore." "But he'll come back," Katherine insisted. "Thomas has money and connections. He won't give up easily." "Neither will I," Preston said simply. Mrs. Carroway, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "Nor will any of us. That baby is as much a part of the rocking as any of us now." She fixed Katherine with a stern look. "Running won't solve this. Standing your ground will." Katherine looked between them, torn between gratitude and fear. "I don't want anyone hurt because of me." "The only people who'll get hurt are those who try to take Emma from you," Preston assured her. "Now you should rest. It's been a difficult day and you'll need your strength." That night, despite Preston's insistence that Sullivan wouldn't dare attack a well-defended ranch, Katherine couldn't sleep. She paced the small cabin, Emma sleeping fitfully in her cradle, jumping at every sound from outside. When a soft knock came at her door around midnight, she nearly cried out in alarm. "Katherine, it's Preston," came the quiet voice from outside. "Just checking that you're all right." She hurried to open the door, relief washing over her at the sight of him standing there, rifle in hand. I can't sleep, she admitted. Every time I close my eyes, I see them taking Emma. Preston's face softened with understanding. May I come in, just for a moment? Katherine nodded, stepping back to allow him inside. He propped his rifle carefully by the door and moved to check on Emma, who slept peacefully despite her mother's anxiety. She doesn't know anything's wrong, he murmured. That's a blessing. For now, Katherine replied, but how long can I keep her safe? If not from Thomas, then from the whispers, the judgment that will follow her all her life because of who she is, who I am. Preston turned to face her fully. Katherine, listen to me. What happened to you was wrong. The shame isn't yours to carry, it belongs to the man who abandoned his responsibilities, who denied his own child. He took her hands in his touch gentle but firm. You've carried enough of that shame, it's time to set it down. The simple truth of his words, spoken with such conviction, broke something open inside Katherine. The tears came then, not the frightened tears of earlier but deep, cleansing sobs that seemed to release years of pent-up pain and shame. Preston pulled her carefully into his arms, one hand cradling the back of her head as she wept against his chest. He said nothing, simply holding her, a solid presence in the storm of her emotions. When her tears finally subsided, Katherine became acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek, of the gentle strength in the arms that held her. I'm sorry, she whispered, not moving away. I've soaked your shirt. It needed washing anyway, Preston replied, his voice a low rumble she could feel as well as hear. Katherine looked up then and found his eyes on her, filled with something that made her breath catch. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Preston lowered his head and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was tentative, questioning, and then, as Katherine responded, it deepened into something more certain, more passionate. His arms tightened around her, and for a moment, the world outside the cabin, with all its threats and dangers, ceased to exist. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Preston rested his forehead against hers. I should go, he said reluctantly. It's not proper for me to be here like this, Katherine smiled slightly. I think we're well past proper, Preston, he chuckled, the sound warming her from the inside. Even so, there'll be time enough for whatever this is becoming between us once we've dealt with Sullivan and his employer. The reminder of their situation sobered her immediately. Do you really think we can? Preston nodded, his expression serious again. I do, but it won't be by running or hiding. We need to face this head-on. He hesitated, then continued. I have an idea, but I'll need to ride into town tomorrow to speak with Judge Wilson. He's a fair man and he knows the law. What are you thinking? Katherine asked. That we make it official your position here, your right to stay with Emma, Preston explained. Legal documentation that even Reynolds and his money can't easily overturn. How? Katherine pressed. Preston released her gently, stepping back. Trust me, he said. I need to work out the details with the judge first, but I think there's a way. After he left, Katherine found she could finally sleep, comforted by the memory of his kiss and the promise of his protection. Whatever Preston was planning, she trusted him completely, a realization that should have frightened her after her experience with Thomas, but instead filled her with a quiet certainty. The next morning, Preston rode into Silver Creek, the nearest town to the Rocking A, leaving Hank and the men with strict instructions to guard Katherine and Emma. The ride gave him time to think, to solidify the plan that had begun forming in his mind the moment Sullivan had threatened Katherine. Judge Ezra Wilson maintained an office above the Silver Creek Bank, where he handled legal matters 3 days a week when court wasn't in session. Preston found him at his desk, spectacles perched on his nose as he reviewed some document. Preston Aldridge, the judge greeted him warmly, rising to shake his hand. What brings you to town? Cattle prices finally good enough to put some money in the bank. Not exactly, Your Honor, Preston replied, taking the seat the older man offered. I need legal advice and perhaps a favor. Wilson's bushy eyebrows rose. Sounds serious. What kind of trouble are you in? Over the next half hour, Preston explained the situation: Katherine's arrival at the ranch, her work there, the threats from Sullivan, and the claims of Thomas Reynolds. The judge listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grave. "This Reynolds fellow," Wilson said when Preston finished. "He denied paternity initially, publicly." Preston nodded. "According to Katherine, yes. Only changed his tune when his parents got involved, worried about the family reputation, apparently." Wilson scratched his beard thoughtfully. "That complicates his claim. Under the law, an unmarried mother is the natural guardian of her illegitimate child. Reynolds would need to prove Katherine unfit to care for the child, which, from what you've told me, would be a difficult case to make." "What if he claims she kidnapped Emma?" Preston pressed. "Took her across state lines without permission." "Without a prior legal claim established by Reynolds, that argument wouldn't hold much water," Wilson assured him. "But I understand your concern. Men with money can sometimes find ways around the law, especially when it comes to matters like this." Preston leaned forward. "That's why I'm here. I want to establish Katherine's legal position beyond any doubt, make it clear that she and Emma have a permanent home, means of support and protection." "And how do you propose to do that?" Wilson asked, though the gleam in his eye suggested he already knew what Preston was thinking. "Marriage," Preston said simply. "If Katherine were my wife, Emma my legally adopted daughter, Reynolds would have an even harder time pressing his claim, wouldn't he?" Wilson nodded slowly. "He would indeed, but Preston, marriage is a serious step." "Are you certain this isn't just about protecting the woman and her child? Marriage should be about more than that." Preston met the judge's gaze steadily. "It is about more than that," he admitted quietly. "I care for Katherine deeply and for Emma. I believe in time, a real marriage could grow between us, but right now their safety is my primary concern." Wilson studied him for a long moment before nodding decisively. "Very well. I'll draw up the necessary paperwork for both the marriage license and the adoption petition." "But Preston," he fixed the younger man with a stern look, "you make certain the lady understands exactly what you're proposing and why. No woman wants to be married merely for convenience, even in circumstances like these." "I understand," Preston assured him. "And I'll make sure Katherine does too." When Preston returned to the ranch that afternoon, he found Katherine in the garden behind the main house, helping Mrs. Caraway harvest late summer vegetables while Emma napped in a basket nearby. The domestic scene struck him powerfully. This could be his family, his home in the truest sense of the word. "Preston," Katherine called, spotting him as she straightened with a handful of beans. "How was your trip to town? Did you see the judge?" "I did," he confirmed, removing his hat as he approached. "Mrs. Caraway, might I have a word alone with Miss Keller?" The housekeeper gave him a knowing look. "Of course, I'll take these inside and check on the little one." She gathered Emma's basket with practiced ease and headed toward the house, but not before giving Preston an encouraging nod. Once they were alone, Preston guided Katherine to a rough-hewn bench beneath an apple tree. "The judge was helpful," he began. "He confirmed that legally you have the stronger claim to Emma, regardless of what Reynolds might say." Katherine's relief was palpable. "Then we don't need to worry." "Not exactly," Preston said carefully. Wilson warned that men with money and connections can sometimes find ways around the law. Reynolds might claim you're unfit, might try to use your unmarried status against you. Fear flickered in Katherine's eyes. "What can we do?" Preston took her hands in his, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been when facing down Sullivan and his men. "Katherine, I have a suggestion. A way to strengthen your position legally, to make it almost impossible for Reynolds to separate you from Emma." "Anything," she said immediately. "I'll do anything to keep her safe." "Marriage," Preston said simply. "To me," Katherine's eyes widened. "Marriage. As my wife, you'd have the protection of my name, my home," Preston explained. "And I could legally adopt Emma as my daughter. Reynolds would have almost no grounds to pursue his claim then." Katherine stared at him, her expression unreadable. "You would do that?" "Marry me, adopt Emma just to protect us from Thomas." Preston took a deep breath. "Not just for that," he admitted. "Katherine, I won't pretend this is how I imagined proposing marriage. In an ideal world, we would have had more time to court properly, but my feelings for you are real." He squeezed her hands gently. "I care for you deeply, and for Emma, I believe we could build a good life together, a real family." Tears filled Catherine's eyes, but they weren't tears of joy. She withdrew her hands from his. "Preston, I can't let you do this. Marriage should be about love, not obligation or protection." "It's not just obligation," Preston insisted. "What I feel for you, you feel compassion," Catherine interrupted gently. "Kindness, perhaps attraction, but love, Preston, we've known each other barely 2 months." "Sometimes that's enough," he argued. "Catherine, I've never felt for any woman what I feel when I'm with you. When I held you last night, when we kissed, that wasn't compassion or obligation." A faint blush colored her cheeks at the memory. "Even so, I won't have you tie yourself to me, to our troubles, out of some misguided sense of honor." Preston stood, frustrated by her resistance. "It's not misguided, it's the right thing to do for all of us." "For now, perhaps," Catherine conceded, "but what about in a year, 5 years? When the threat from Thomas has passed, would you still want to be married to a woman whose reputation is forever tarnished, whose daughter will always be a reminder of another man?" "Yes," Preston said firmly. "Catherine, I don't care about your past, I care about our future, and Emma." His voice softened. "I already love that little girl as if she were my own." Catherine rose to face him, tears streaming freely now. "That's what makes this so hard, because I care for you too, Preston, more than I thought possible after what happened with Thomas. But I won't have you sacrifice your future for us." "It's not a sacrifice," Preston insisted. "It's what I want." "Even if it means you can never have children of your own," Catherine challenged. "I know how much the rocking means to you. Don't you want a son to pass it on to someday?" Preston's expression softened. "If we're blessed with children together, I'll be grateful, but Emma is enough, you are enough." For a moment, Catherine wavered, the longing in her eyes giving Preston hope, but then she shook her head. "I need time," she whispered. "This is too important a decision to make in haste." Preston nodded slowly, disappointed but understanding. "Of course, take all the time you need." He reached out to brush a tear from her cheek. "Just know that my offer stands, and it comes from my heart, not just my sense of duty." Catherine caught his hand and pressed it briefly to her lips before releasing it. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything you've done for us already, regardless of what happens next." Preston watched her walk back to the house, his heart heavy with unspoken words. He had laid his feelings bare, offered her everything he had to give. Now all he could do was wait, and hope that she would see that his proposal was about far more than protection from Thomas Reynolds. Later that evening, as Preston sat alone on the porch watching the stars emerge, Hank approached with news that would change everything. "Boss," the foreman said, his expression grim. "Ryder just came in from town." Sullivan and his men were seen at the Silver Spur Saloon, bragging about how they're going to collect the woman and child tomorrow, by force if necessary. Preston's jaw tightened. "Did they say when?" "Dawn," Hank replied. "Figure to catch us sleeping." "They'll find us wide awake," Preston growled, standing. "Double the guards tonight, no one sleeps until this is over." But as Hank turned to go, another thought struck Preston. "Wait, there's another way." His mind raced, formulating a plan. "Get the men together and fetch Mrs. Carraway. I need to speak with Catherine." Within the hour, Preston had gathered everyone in the main house. Catherine sat clutching Emma, her face pale but determined as Preston outlined his plan. "Sullivan expects to find us here, waiting to defend the ranch," Preston explained. "Instead, we'll slip away in the night, Catherine, Emma, and I. Mrs. Carraway will accompany us." "Where will you go?" Hank asked. "To Judge Wilson in Silver Creek," Preston replied. "He's expecting Sullivan to make trouble, and he's prepared to issue a legal order protecting Catherine and Emma." "And what about us?" one of the ranch hands asked. "Do we just let Sullivan and his boys waltz in?" Preston smiled grimly. "No, you'll be waiting for them, but not to fight to stall. Make them think Catherine and Emma are still here, somewhere on the ranch. Keep them searching, keep them busy until we're safely with the judge." The men nodded, understanding dawning in their eyes. "Once we have the judge's order, we'll bring Sheriff Taylor back with us," Preston continued. "Sullivan may be willing to defy me, but he won't risk openly defying the law." Catherine spoke up then, her voice stronger than Preston had expected. "This plan puts all of you at risk for our sake. I can't ask that of you." You're not asking, Miss Keller, Hank said firmly. We're offering. Nobody threatens a woman and child on our watch. Murmurs of agreement came from the other men, and Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, she whispered. All of you. Preston turned to her. We'll leave in 2 hours. Pack only what you need for Emma. We can collect the rest later. As the group dispersed to prepare, Katherine approached Preston. You're risking everything for us, she said quietly. Not everything, Preston replied. Just doing what any decent man would do. Katherine studied him for a long moment. No, she said finally, not any man would do this. Only you. Before Preston could respond, she reached up on tiptoe and pressed a brief, gentle kiss to his lips. My answer is yes, she whispered. If the offer still stands. Joy surged through Preston, but he contained it, aware of the seriousness of their situation. It stands, he assured her. When this is over, we'll do it properly if you're still sure then. I will be, Katherine promised, and for the first time since Sullivan's arrival, Preston saw real hope in her eyes. 2 hours later, a wagon slipped quietly away from the rocking under cover of darkness. Preston drove, with Mrs. Carroway beside him and Katherine in the back with Emma, who mercifully slept through the bumpy journey. They took a roundabout route to Silver Creek, avoiding the main trail where Sullivan might have posted lookouts. The town was quiet when they arrived just before dawn, most buildings dark and silent. But a light burned in the window above the bank Judge Wilson's office, where the judge himself awaited them, as promised. You made good time, Wilson said as he ushered them inside. I've prepared the papers as we discussed, Preston. If Miss Keller is agreeable, we can proceed immediately. Katherine, cradling a still sleeping Emma, stepped forward. I am, Your Honor. I want to marry Preston and have him adopt Emma as his own. Her voice was steady, her decision clearly made. Wilson nodded, satisfied. Very well. I've taken the liberty of asking Reverend Thomas to join us. He gestured to a thin, elderly man who emerged from the shadows of the office. He's prepared to perform the ceremony now, and I'll record it officially immediately afterward. Preston turned to Katherine, suddenly anxious. Are you certain? This isn't how I wanted it to be for you rushed in the middle of the night with danger breathing down our necks. Katherine smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her tired face. I'm certain. The circumstances don't matter. What matters is that we're together, all of us. She glanced down at Emma, then back to Preston. This is right. I feel it in my heart. And so, as the first pale light of dawn crept through the office windows, Preston Aldridge and Katherine Keller were married in a simple ceremony with Mrs. Carroway dabbing at her eyes and Judge Wilson serving as witness. Emma slept peacefully throughout, unaware that her future was being secured with each word spoken. Afterward, as Wilson recorded the marriage and prepared the adoption papers, Sheriff Taylor arrived, summoned by a messenger the judge had sent earlier. Sullivan's men were spotted riding toward your ranch about an hour ago, the sheriff informed them. If your boys can hold them off until I get there, they will, Preston assured him. They know what to do, Taylor nodded grimly. I'll gather my deputies and ride out immediately. You folks stay here where it's safe until I send word. As the sheriff departed, Preston moved to the window, gazing in the direction of the rocking A, worry etched on his features. They'll be all right, Katherine said, joining him. Your men are brave and smart. They are, Preston agreed. But Sullivan's desperate, and desperate men are unpredictable. Katherine slipped her hand into his. We've done all we can for now, the rest is in God's hands. Preston squeezed her hand gently, and in the hands of the law. Judge Wilson's order protects you and Emma legally now, and our marriage strengthens that protection even further. It's more than protection to me, Katherine said softly. You know that, don't you? Preston turned to face her fully. I do, and to me as well. He hesitated, then added, I love you, Katherine Aldridge. I think I have since I first found you under that cottonwood tree. Katherine's eyes shone with unshed tears. And I love you, Preston Aldridge, for your kindness, your courage, and your heart. You saw me at my lowest and still thought I was worth fighting for. You were always worth fighting for, Preston replied, drawing her close. You and Emma both. The hours of waiting that followed tested their patience sorely. Mrs. Caraway did her best to keep spirits up, producing a surprising supply of penny candies from her pocket for when Emma awakened, and regaling them with stories of her youth in Ireland. Judge Wilson provided coffee and sandwiches around midday, but as afternoon stretched toward evening with no word from the ranch, Preston's anxiety mounted. "I should ride out there," he said finally, pacing the office, "see what's happening, and leave your new wife and daughter unprotected." Wilson objected. Sullivan could have men watching the town, waiting for just such a move. Preston knew the judge was right, but the waiting was torture. Just as he was about to insist on going despite the risks, hoofbeats sounded in the street below. Everyone froze, listening intently. "It's Taylor," Wilson announced, peering through the window, "and he's alone." Preston rushed to the door, yanking it open as the sheriff reached the top of the stairs. "What happened?" he demanded. Taylor removed his hat, revealing a tired but satisfied expression. "It's over," he said simply. "Sullivan and his boys arrived at dawn, just as expected. Your men played their parts perfectly, led them on a merry chase around the ranch for hours, claiming the woman and child were hiding somewhere on the property. And when you arrived," Preston pressed. "Sullivan wasn't happy to see us," Taylor replied with a grim smile. "Especially when I showed him Judge Wilson's order establishing Katherine as Emma's legal guardian and you as the child's adoptive father. When he realized the game was up, he admitted Reynolds had paid him $500 to bring the child back by any means necessary." Katherine gasped. "He admitted it, that Thomas hired him to take Emma by force," Taylor nodded. "He did, and I've got his signed statement to that effect." He produced a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Reynolds won't be bothering you again, Mrs. Aldridge. Sullivan's statement makes it clear he was hired to commit kidnapping, a serious crime that Reynolds won't want connected to his respectable name." Katherine sagged against Preston in relief. "It's really over." "It is," Taylor confirmed. "Sullivan and his men are cooling their heels in my jail, and I've sent a telegram to the authorities in Missouri informing them of Reynolds' involvement in the scheme. He'll be far too busy defending himself to pursue any claim on Emma." Preston wrapped his arm around Katherine's shoulders. "Thank you, Sheriff, and Judge Wilson, we owe you both a debt we can't repay." Wilson waved away his thanks. "Just doing my duty to see justice served. Though I will expect an invitation to a proper wedding celebration once you've had time to settle in as a family." "You'll have it," Preston promised, smiling down at Katherine, "and perhaps a christening for Emma as well to mark her officially becoming an Aldridge." Katherine's eyes filled with tears of joy. "I can hardly believe it. After all this time running, hiding, carrying the shame of what happened, it's really over." Preston cupped her cheek tenderly. "I told you the day we met you've carried enough of it. Now it's time to set it down and move forward, together." Emma, awakening in Mrs. Caraway's arms, chose that moment to let out a happy gurgle as if expressing her agreement with the sentiment. Everyone laughed, the tension of the long day finally breaking. "Let's go home," Preston said, reaching for his daughter. "All of us." 5 years later, the Rockinga Ranch was thriving. The main house had been expanded to accommodate the growing Aldridge family. Emma, now a spirited 5-year-old with her mother's blue eyes, and an independent streak that both delighted and exasperated her parents, and her 3-year-old brother, Samuel, who had his father's serious gray eyes and thoughtful demeanor. On a warm September evening, Preston sat on the expanded porch, watching Katherine chase the children across the yard in a game of tag. Her laughter floated on the evening air, bright and uninhibited in a way that still made his heart swell with love and gratitude. So much had changed since that fateful day when he'd found her beneath the cottonwood tree. The shame that had once shadowed her eyes was long gone, replaced by the confidence of a woman who knew herself to be loved, respected, and valued. Emma, too, had flourished, knowing only the security of being an Aldridge, cherished by her adoptive father as fiercely as by her mother. As for Preston, the ranch had become truly home in a way it had never been before Katherine and Emma had arrived. The loneliness that had been his constant companion since the war had vanished, replaced by the joyful chaos of family life. There had been challenges, of course. The first year of their marriage had seen adjustments on both sides. Preston had to learn to share his space, his decisions, his life with a partner after years of solitude. Katherine had to learn to trust again, to believe that Preston's love was steadfast and true, that he would never abandon her or Emma as Thomas had done. But they had faced each challenge together, their bond strengthening with each obstacle overcome. The day Samuel was born had been one of unmitigated joy for them, both a tangible symbol of their union, a brother for Emma, who had taken to the role of big sister with enthusiasm and pride. Thomas Reynolds had never troubled them again. The scandal that erupted when his involvement with Sullivan came to light had been enough to ensure his permanent retreat from their lives. Occasionally, news filtered westward through travelers or letters he had married a banker's daughter, moved east, reinvented himself. Katherine received such news with equanimity now, feeling neither anger nor fear, only a distant pity for the man who had missed the opportunity to know his daughter. "Papa, Papa, look," Emma called now, racing toward him with something clutched in her small hands. "I found a horned toad. Isn't he magnificent?" Preston chuckled at her vocabulary, a direct result of the books Katherine read to the children each night. "Magnificent indeed," he agreed, examining the small lizard she proudly displayed. "But remember what we talked about with wild creatures," Emma nodded solemnly. "They belong in nature, not in my pocket. I'll release him by the garden where there are lots of bugs for him to eat." "That's my girl," Preston said, ruffling her dark blonde curls. "Thoughtful of others, even the smallest ones." Emma beamed at the praise before dashing off to find the perfect spot for her new friend's release. Samuel, not to be outdone, toddled after her as fast as his little legs would carry him, shouting, "Wait for me, Emmy." Katherine joined Preston on the porch, slightly breathless from the game. "Those two will sleep well tonight," she observed, settling beside him on the swing he'd built last winter. "As will their mother, I imagine," Preston teased, slipping an arm around her shoulders and drawing her close. Katherine leaned into him with a contented sigh. "It's been a perfect day," she murmured. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life, our life." "Believe it," Preston said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You've earned every moment of happiness, Katherine." She turned to face him, her blue eyes serious suddenly. "We both have. You saved us, Preston, not just from Thomas and Sullivan, but from a life of shame and hiding. You gave Emma a name, a home, a father who loves her as his own." "And you gave me a family," Preston replied simply. "Something I'd stopped believing I would ever have." He paused, watching as Emma carefully released her horned toad while explaining its habits to a fascinated Samuel. "They're beautiful, aren't they, our children?" "They are," Katherine agreed, following his gaze. "And they'll grow up knowing only love and acceptance, never shame or rejection." Preston nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "That's all I ever wanted for them, for you." Katherine reached up to trace the lines of his face, still handsome at 47, though now weathered by sun and wind and creased with laugh lines that hadn't been there when they met. "And for yourself." "What did you want for Preston Aldridge?" He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Exactly what I have. A home filled with laughter, work that matters, and a woman who sees me clearly and loves me anyway." "Not anyway," Katherine corrected gently, "because of who you are. Because you're the kind of man who finds a woman alone with her shame and says you've carried enough of it, the kind who offers his name, his home, his heart without condition or reservation." Preston smiled, remembering that day with perfect clarity. "Best decision I ever made, stopping by that cottonwood tree." "For all of us," Katherine agreed, settling back against his shoulder as they watched their children play in the golden light of the setting sun. "For all of us." And as night fell softly over the rocking A, Preston Aldridge knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, no longer alone, no longer carrying burdens of shame or regret, but moving forward as a family, bound by love that had grown from the most unexpected of beginnings into something enduring and true.